It's no secret that George R. R. Martin is interested in history and that he bases things in his book series, A Song of Ice and Fire, on real life events. There are numerous references all throughout the books and also the TV shows, well known and not, and there will likely be more in the future in The Winds of Winter, if it ever comes out. But today, we will be looking at some of the many references to historical events, again, well known and not, while also being infused with a couple of my theories and ideas as well. So, without further ado, let's get into it and begin. The entire backdrop of A Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire is directly influenced by the Wars of the Roses, this being probably the most well-known historical event that influences the series. The Wars of the Roses were a series of English civil wars fought in the 15th century between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. These historical conflicts were marked by intense family feuds, power struggles, and shifting alliances, and they influenced the fictional power struggles between the houses of Westeros, like the Lannisters, the Starks, and more. And while the series does not directly parallel the historical accounts, it is clear there is influence there, at least as a framework. Next, the other most well-known thing probably is the Red Wedding. The Red Wedding, while being one of the most, if not the most, iconic scene from the books and the show, is also directly influenced by a real event or events. The Black Dinner and the Massacre of Glencoe, both from Scottish history. For the Black Dinner, we have that in 1440, during the reign of King James II of Scotland, two young members of the powerful Douglas clan, William Douglas and his younger brother David, were invited to dine with the king at Edinburgh Castle. Despite assurances of safety, they were betrayed. After dinner, a black bull's head, a symbol of death, was brought out, and the young Douglases were dragged away and executed. This betrayal of hospitality and political treachery is mirrored in the Red Wedding, where the Starks and the armies of the North attend what they believe to be a safe gathering, only to face a violent massacre, and the bull being directly similar to how they stick a direwolf's head onto the headless body of Robb Stark. The Massacre of Glencoe in 1692 also had a strong influence. In this event, members of the MacDonald clan of Glencoe were killed by soldiers who had been staying as their guests. The massacre arose from a dispute over an oath of loyalty to King William III, which was signed late by the MacDonalds due to logistical issues. The soldiers who were staying under the clan's hospitality for over a week received orders to kill the clan members. In the early morning, they turned on their hosts, slaughtering many as they slept. The geography and history of Westeros and Essos is based on many things. Like, come on, just look at the shape of Westeros and the shape of Great Britain, for example. But also the houses, the lands, and the groups involved can all be compared to real life as well. The north and the lands of the Starks, the Mormonts, etc., all being similar to Scotland and northern England, with the wide open lands and rolling hills. Dorne being a direct comparison to Moorish Spain, the Targaryens being comparable to the Norman invasion of England that occurred in 1066 AD, Aegon the Conqueror sounding similar to William the Conqueror, the Greyjoys being similar to Viking culture, Casterly Rock, the castle of the Lannisters, being a direct reference to the Rock of Gibraltar, and also in Essos we have things like the Old Valyrian Empire, a huge sprawling empire with great influence, beautiful architecture, sprawling roads, and more being based on, of course, the Roman Empire. Both empires falling, whether in 476 or 1453 AD, or through a mysterious event called the Doom, perhaps being influenced by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius with Pompeii and other natural disasters. The free states of Essos being city-states and trading hubs like real-life Venice and other city-states. The Dothraki being comparable to nomadic horse-riding people from the Eurasian steppes like the Huns, the Mongols, and the Avars. Basically, every single group, lands, people, whatever, even if I mention them or not, can be compared mostly to real-life things. Valyrian steel and wildfire, two things used in the series as weapons, can also be directly compared to real life. Valyrian steel being essentially super strong and superior steel, better than the average weaponry, being like the real-life Damascus steel. Valyrian steel and its formula, recipe, and how to make it being lost with the Doom of Valyria, being comparable to the exact old formula being lost on how to make Damascus steel, though today we can basically make it again, we just don't know the exact way they did it. Wildfire is comparable to Greek fire, something that is recreatable in the series but is not precisely known to us in real life. Greek fire was a highly flammable substance developed by the Byzantine Empire, likely in or around the 7th century AD, and was used as a powerful weapon in naval battles, especially against invading Arab fleets. Greek fire could ignite on water, making it particularly effective in naval warfare, and it burned intensely once deployed, being difficult to extinguish. And while the recipe is lost to us today, it was believed to be made of and composed of petroleum or naphtha, which is a crude oil distillate, quicklime, and sulfur. Wildfire burns green, spreads uncontrollably, and has near magical properties. And wildfire was created by the alchemists of King's Landing, and it can also burn on water and is difficult to put out too. Wildfire, in essence, takes the legendary status of Greek fire and just elevates it ever more so. The Night's Watch, the group Jon Snow belongs to, and much of what is related to the Watch can also be compared to real historical things. The Night's Watch being sort of similar to old crusading orders during the High Middle Ages like the Templars, the Hospitallers, etc. The Wall being like Hadrian's Wall, these walls separating Roman Britain from the barbarians like the Picts and the Scots to the north, or for the Seven Kingdoms from the Wildlings to their north. Castor's sacrifices of his sons can be seen to be inspired by things like ancient practices of child sacrifice as well, such as the ancient Carthaginians and their sacrifices, or the Canaanites and their child sacrifices. Religions are also things very significant in this series. There are many of them, and some can be compared to real life. Most obviously, the faith of the Seven being directly comparable to Catholicism, and really just medieval era Christianity as a whole. The Seven being one god with distinct identities, like the Trinity, though done with more of a pantheon-esque vibe to it. The faith militant uprising of the show mainly can be based on religious rebellions like the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 and the German Peasants' War of 1524 to 1525, where religious zealotry challenged secular authority, mirroring the faith of the Seven's challenge to the crown. The old gods of the North are based on animistic and nature worship religions, particularly Celtic Druidism and Norse paganism. The Lord of Light, modeled primarily on Zoroastrianism with elements of Manichaeism and Gnosticism, this religion is a dualist religion. R'hllor, the god of light, heat, and life, is in a dualistic battle against the Great Other, a dark, cold, and deadly force. This dualism mirrors Zoroastrianism's battle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. Additionally, R'hllor follows practice rituals that resemble medieval alchemical and occult traditions, often using fire as a cleansing or prophetic element. The drowned god of the Ironborn reflects the Ironborn's culture, which resembles the Norse and other seafaring societies with values of raiding, warrior ethos, and survival at sea. The drowned god's ritual of near-drowning baptism echoes ancient maritime rites meant to honor and appease the sea. The many-faced god of the faceless men represents death itself, seen as a singular entity worshipped under various faces or deities, similar to the way Hinduism views Brahman as the supreme entity that underlies all other gods. The faceless men's philosophy on life and death reflects Buddhist detachment and the idea of embracing mortality as well, but I also find this order to be similar as well to the Muslim splinter sect called the Assassins, who lived relatively isolated lives in secret with differing beliefs, and they killed their enemies. Lastly, the Great Stallion of the Dothraki is similar to the Mongol reverence for Tengri, the sky god, and the Dothraki view horses as sacred, aligning with how steppe cultures often held horses in high regard, and they can fall into animism-type religions as well. Now onto the perhaps lesser-known similarities this series has to the real world. The Stannis ice hole theory, as I'm calling it, which has not happened in the books yet and was not in the show, is often compared to the historical story of Napoleon's Battle of Austerlitz and other events that deal with troops, winter, and the ice. Basically, the theory goes that Stannis, the one true king, hell yeah, is going to fake out the enemy army by using a fake light tower. This will lead the enemy army walking onto frozen water with holes drilled through it. Along with that, and perhaps a turncoat enemy army joining Stannis, the army will face destruction once his forces also help to break the ice, sending the enemy army, mainly composed of the Freys, plunging to their deaths in the freezing water. This is similar to the story of Napoleon not letting his enemies escape or retreat after the Battle of Austerlitz. The story goes that the retreating enemy troops, Russians and Austrians, were fleeing, and Napoleon launched artillery onto the ice they were running across, and it broke and many died. Though this likely did not happen as it's said, and is very exaggerated. But nonetheless, it's an interesting story, and George likely knows about it, I would assume. Another, perhaps more likely connection could be the Battle of the Ice in 1242, where a battle between the forces of the Grand Duchy of Moscow and the Teutonic Knights was fought on the frozen surface of Lake Peipus. The Teutonic Knights suffered a devastating defeat when the ice began to break beneath their heavily armored troops. Next is the chain that Tyrion suggests be used to defend King's Landing before the Battle of the Blackwater. It basically directly mirrors the chain of Constantinople, which was used in the defense of the Byzantine Empire. Both involve using a massive chain to block or control movement across waterways, and while used in the series, you might expect it to be all fantasy, but it was also used in real life. The Golden Horn is a natural harbor in Constantinople, and the Byzantine Empire set up a large iron chain across the entrance of the harbor to prevent enemy ships from entering and attacking the city, or trapping them inside, especially during times of siege. As was said earlier with Aegon the Conqueror being compared to William the Conqueror, many of the characters in A Song of Ice and Fire can be compared to real-life ones as well. We can see this in Robert Baratheon being similar to Henry VIII, once powerful warriors who are out of their primes and involved in marriages that are generally pretty unhealthy, with cheating and siring bastards, or literally killing them, as was the case with Henry, though Cersei did kind of kill Robert. Cersei can be compared to Catherine de' Medici or even Anne Boleyn too, Henry VIII's one wife, but that is really because of the incest allegations that Anne faced, while Cersei literally does do that. Catherine de' Medici was known for her political maneuvering, ruthless decision-making, and her role in St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where thousands of Protestants were killed, like Cersei blowing up the Sept. Catherine sought to secure her family's position on the throne, even at the cost of innocent lives. There are more like Daenerys being comparable to Cleopatra, perhaps, Sansa being like Elizabeth I, Jon being like Henry I, etc., etc. There's basically an endless list to compare characters to, and I would love to hear if any of you have comparisons. In real life, we have the 7 wonders of the world, both modern and ancient, while in A Song of Ice and Fire, they have the wonders made by man and just the wonders, which are natural. Wonders Made by Man is one of the 2 books, the other being just Wonders, written by Lomas Longstrider, the famous traveler who is a Westerosi scribe. Wonders Made by Man talks about 9 man-made wonders of the world, although only 8 have been confirmed in-universe so far. These include the Wall. The Wall is 700 feet high and 300 miles long, built by the Starks of Winterfell and other ancient builders to keep out the dangers of the far north, including the White Walkers. The Great Wall of China is often compared to the Wall because both are massive fortifications designed to protect civilizations from external threats. The Valyrian roads are ancient, paved roads built by the Valyrian freehold, said to have stretched across much of Essos, connecting the Valyrian peninsula with various parts of the continent. These roads are reminiscent of Roman roads, which were engineered marvels of the ancient world, stretching across the Roman Empire. The Titan of Braavos is a gigantic statue that stands at the entrance to the harbor of Braavos, one of the free cities. The Titan is described as being larger than life, with an arm that can reach out over the sea and a flame in its hand. This is often compared to the Colossus of Rhodes. The Colossus was a massive bronze statue of the Greek god Helios that stood at the entrance to the harbor of Rhodes. The Triple Walls of Qarth. The city of Qarth, located on the southern edge of the Dothraki Sea, is surrounded by 3 walls: the outer wall, the inner wall, and the wall that surrounds the palace of the Pureborn. These walls protect the city from the harsh environment of the desert and also invasions. These triple walls can be compared to ancient fortified cities like the walls of Constantinople, which were known for their complex and layered defense systems as well. The 3 bells of Norvos. Norvos, one of the free cities in Essos, is known for its 3 massive bells that are a symbol of the city's power and authority. The bells are so large that they are said to be heard for miles, and they are associated with the priesthood of the city, who often make political decisions. While not exactly like a specific historical wonder, the 3 bells of Norvos could be seen as a nod to the great bells of medieval Europe, such as the bells of Notre Dame in Paris. The Long Bridge of Atlantis. The Long Bridge of Atlantis is a colossal bridge that stretches across the Rhine River, connecting the city of Atlantis with the rest of the continent. The Long Bridge of Atlantis is similar to real-world engineering marvels such as the Golden Gate Bridge, or even bridges of old, like the London Bridge, for example. The Palace with 1,000 Rooms in Sarnath, an ancient city in Essos, is home to the Palace with 1,000 Rooms, a vast and decaying palace that is said to be a relic of an ancient and lost civilization. The palace is a symbol of opulence and decay, illustrating the fall of a once great empire. The Palace with 1,000 Rooms could be compared to the Palace of Versailles in France, known for its vastness, luxury, and 1,000 rooms that housed royalty and their retinue. And the Great Pyramid of Geese. I mean, come on, do I even have to explain this one? But the others are likely the Tower at Old Town, which is the tallest structure in the 7 Kingdoms, or the 5 Forts, a massive fortress along the northeastern boundaries of the Golden Empire of Yi Ti. Some also suggest Harrenhal, but it doesn't really make sense, and it's unlikely. In regards to his other book, Wonders, there is one confirmed one, and that is the large cavern system located 100 leagues northwest of Norvos, while really only one other speculative one is talked about, the Bones. The mountains located east of the Dothraki Sea, separating the Dothraki from the plains of the Jogos Nahai. Now onto my own theories and ideas, which may or may not be crackpot ideas. First, the connection Lomas Longstrider has to the real-world examples, like him being comparable to Europeans going to far-off lands. He can most readily be compared to Marco Polo, I think, which isn't a new theory, but Marco Polo traveled from Italy to the court of the Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan. He served in his court there and spent many years there, learning the languages, collecting taxes, and writing. Also, he can be compared to Sir John Mandeville, who I want to eventually make a video about. He was a knight of either English or Flemish origin who wrote a book about his travels to the east, into China and those lands. He likely only really went as far east as a little past Jerusalem, as was discussed in the great book, The Riddle and the Night, The Search of John Mandeville, the world's greatest traveler, but Sir John described people with faces on their chests, giant foot-shaped people, and more. Also, I am reminded of John of Plano Carpini, an Italian Catholic priest who traveled to Central Asia to converse with the Khan and talk about Christ with the Nestorian Christians of the East, Buddhists, etc. Just Lomas Longstrider has a general connection to those early European explorers writing of lands that most people had never been to before. Next, we have the Hound and Edward II. The Hound has a different fate in the books than he does in the show, and in the books, it is pretty heavily implied that after almost being killed, he joins up with a silent monastic order and learns to live a new life in anonymity. This, I found, has connections to the theory that after King Edward II was deposed and Edward III became king, Edward was secretly exiled to the continent and worked as a laborer in anonymity. The theory is expanded upon in the book Edward II by Catherine Warner, but in general, the theory doesn't have much evidence, and it's basically eyewitness accounts that he was working on the mainland continent of Europe in anonymity as a basic laborer. Okay, so it's no secret that Dorne is basically Spain. The Tower of Joy, according to the wiki of Fire and Ice, was a round tower in the northern edge of the Red Mountains of Dorne. It was located at the north end of the Prince's Pass, with Kingsgrave to the south and Nightsong to the north. Martin may have been inspired by the Joyous Guard. According to Arthurian legend, Lancelot names the castle himself. He later rescues Queen Guinevere and brings her to the Joyous Guard. Okay, so now we have that, but from there, a possible connection can be found with the Order of Mountjoy, a real-life Spanish crusading order. Its origins are somewhat unclear, but is believed to have been established in the early 1100s, around the time when the Reconquista, the Christian effort to reclaim Iberian territory from Muslim rule, was intensifying. The Order of Mountjoy was not one of the most powerful or well-documented orders of the era, but it played a role in the larger context of crusading orders like the Knights Templar, the Knights Hospitaller, and the Order of Santiago. Its name is likely a reference to Mountjoy in the Holy Land, which was a site of some significance during the Crusades. I'm literally basing this off the fact that the Order of Mountjoy is Spanish and named after something with joy in its name, and Dorne is based off Spain. It, on top of the Arthurian legend, is a cool theory, though it may literally just be a coincidence and I'm a schizo. Next, perhaps there is a connection between the Mountain, or Gregor Clegane, and giant super soldiers of real life, the Potsdam Giants. From Wikipedia, the Potsdam Giants was the name given to the Prussian Infantry Regiment No. 6. The regiment was composed of taller than average soldiers and was founded in 1675. It was eventually dissolved in 1806 after the Prussians were defeated by Napoleon. The original required height was 6 Prussian feet, or about 6 foot 2 inches, or 1.88 meters, well above average then and now. One of the tallest soldiers, the Irishman James Kirkland, was reportedly 2.17 meters, or basically 7 foot 1. He's freaking tall as hell. This is just cool because it's real life giant super soldiers, but I don't know if there's really a connection. Lastly, we have young Griff and the Targaryens and their connection to real life events relating to exile and the English throne. Young Griff claims to be Aegon Targaryen, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell. According to the story he tells, he was smuggled out of King's Landing after the Lannisters sacked the city and killed his parents during Robert's Rebellion, though many fans and characters in the series believe that young Griff is not a real Aegon Targaryen, but an imposter placed in his position by those who want to restore the Targaryen dynasty, namely Varys. In real life, Edgar the Atheling was a claimant to the English throne during the time of the Norman conquest, and after the death of King Harold II at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, Edgar was the closest legitimate heir to the English throne, but he was not able to secure the crown due to the Norman invasion under William the Conqueror. Following the defeat at Hastings, Edgar was exiled and initially sought refuge in Scotland. In 1068, after an uprising against the Normans, Edgar fled to Hungary with his mother and other members of the royal family. His time in Hungary is not really well documented, but it is believed that he was taken there with the help of King Andrew I of Hungary, who had familial connections to Edgar through his mother, Emma of Normandy. Edgar later returned to England in 1069, but never succeeded in taking the throne, and his role in English politics largely diminished, perhaps mirroring young Griff's fate in never taking the throne. I don't know, maybe. As it related to the Targaryens, Edgar Atheling had a sister, Margaret of Essex. She was also exiled to Hungary following the Norman conquest of England, though Margaret eventually married King Malcolm III of Scotland and became the Queen of Scotland. She was later canonized as Saint Margaret of Scotland for her charitable work and efforts to bring reform to the Scottish Church. Perhaps the two, Edgar and Margaret, mirror Viserys and Daenerys, where one goes on to be a queen and one does not ultimately become a king. Alright everyone, that about does it for this video. I know it's not an iceberg video, and I know it's on the shorter side of things, but there will be an iceberg video relatively soon. I think it's evident George loves history and loves putting historical things into his own work, which I think is honestly great. When I'm reading history, I'll come across things and think to myself, that is literally similar to Game of Thrones. But anyway, that wraps it up, the whole video. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to. If you don't, that's cool too. Just thank you for watching and making it to the end. Stay tuned for more videos soon. Have a great day, all you beautiful people. Goodbye.